A broke dishwasher tied the knot with a 68-year-old rich woman, believing his troubles were over. But within 24 hours, he discovered a terrifying secret that sent him running to the cops. The truth is more shocking than fiction. The rain hit the pavement in steady drizzles as Jake Miller wiped his damp hands on his grease-stained apron. The scent of dish soap mixed with the sharp aroma of leftover food scraps as he stacked the last of the plates onto the drying rack. Another exhausting shift at Frankie's diner, and his back ached from standing for hours. He glanced at the clock above the kitchen door. 11:27 p.m. His shift was over. Pulling off his apron, Jake grabbed his jacket and stepped outside into the cold night air. The neon sign above the diner flickered weakly. The moment he stepped onto the street, his phone vibrated in his pocket. He barely had time to check the caller ID before answering. "Jake Miller speaking." A smooth, composed voice responded. "Mr. Miller, this is Victoria Langley. We need to talk. It's about your financial situation." Jake furrowed his brows. "Who is this? How do you know about my finances?" "I know more than you think," Victoria said, her voice calm yet commanding. "Meet me at Langley Estate tomorrow at noon. This is important." Before Jake could protest, the line went dead. He stared at the screen, confusion and unease twisting in his gut. The next day, Jake stood outside Langley Estate, shifting uncomfortably. The mansion was a towering structure of stone and ivy, its large iron gates creaking open as a black-clad butler, Mr. Benson, greeted him with an unreadable expression. "Miss Langley is expecting you," he said, leading Jake inside. The interior was just as imposing as the outside, high ceilings, chandeliers, and walls lined with oil paintings. The air smelled of old wood and polished marble. Victoria Langley sat near a grand piano in a high-backed chair. She was elegant despite her age, silver hair perfectly styled, piercing blue eyes scanning him with quiet intensity. "You must be wondering why you're here," she said smoothly. Jake nodded warily. "Yeah, I'd like to know that." Victoria gestured for him to sit across from her. "I have an offer for you, one that will change your life." Jake crossed his arms. "I don't do shady deals, lady." A small smirk touched her lips. "This isn't a deal. It's a marriage proposal." Jake stiffened. Of all the things she could have said, this was the last thing he expected. "Excuse me," he scoffed. "I think you've got the wrong guy." "I don't make mistakes, Jake." Her tone remained cool, controlled. "I know about your debts. I know about your aunt's medical bills. Marry me, and I'll clear everything. In return, you'll be my husband in name only." Jake's chest tightened. Aunt Linda's treatment was costing thousands. Money he didn't have. He clenched his jaw. "Why me? There are plenty of other desperate men out there." Victoria leaned forward slightly. "Because you're the right choice. No attachments. No future to look forward to. You need money, and I need a husband." Jake shook his head, standing up. "I don't marry strangers." Victoria's eyes hardened. "Think carefully before you refuse. The offer won't stand forever." Jake stormed out of the estate, his mind spinning. This was insane. Who in their right mind would agree to something like that? That evening, Jake sat at the tiny kitchen table in the one-bedroom apartment he shared with Aunt Linda. The dim light barely illuminated the piles of unpaid bills in front of him. Linda coughed weakly from the couch, the weight of her sickness evident. "You're quiet tonight," she said softly. "Something on your mind?" Jake hesitated before telling her everything. When he finished, Linda exhaled slowly. "Jake, maybe you should consider it." His stomach twisted. "You can't be serious." "We don't have many options," she said, her voice strained. "You've worked yourself to the bone for years. If she's offering to help, maybe it's not as crazy as it sounds." Jake stared at his hands, frustration boiling inside him. "It's a trap, Linda. No one gives something for nothing." She reached out, squeezing his hand. "I know you don't want to be like your father, but this isn't a crime. It's a choice." Jake swallowed the lump in his throat. His father, a criminal con artist, had ruined countless lives before disappearing. Jake had spent his entire life trying to be different, but could he really walk away from an offer that could save them both? The next morning, Jake returned to Langley Estate. Victoria was already waiting, sipping tea in the vast sitting room. She didn't look surprised to see him. "I assume you've made your decision." Jake took a deep breath. "I'll do it." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Good. The arrangements will be made immediately." A week later, Jake stood in a small courthouse, dressed in a tailored suit Victoria had provided. The ceremony was quiet, witnessed only by Victoria's lawyer and a notary. As the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Jake felt a chill settle over him. Victoria turned to him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome to your new life, Mr. Miller." That evening, as Jake arrived at the Langley estate for the first time as Victoria's husband, he couldn't shake the unease curling in his stomach. The estate loomed in the dim light, its towering windows dark and lifeless. The moment he stepped inside, Mr. Benson greeted him. "Your room has been prepared, sir." Jake followed the butler down the endless hallways, the grand estate feeling more like a prison than a home. His room was large, lavish, but cold, untouched by warmth. At dinner, Victoria sat at the opposite end of the long dining table, her silverware clinking against fine china. The silence between them felt heavy, suffocating. "I trust you'll settle in soon," she said, cutting into her steak with surgical precision. Jake hesitated before replying. "This place feels different." Victoria smirked slightly. "You'll get used to it. Or you won't. Either way, you're here now." Jake's jaw tightened. Something about the way she said it unsettled him. As he lay in bed that night, staring at the high ceiling, the weight of his decision pressed down on him like a heavy chain. Had he just saved himself and Linda, or walked into a trap? The first few days at Langley Estate passed in an eerie stillness. Jake Miller moved through the grand halls, feeling like a stranger in a world he didn't belong to. The mansion was lavish, every piece of furniture expensive and untouched, yet something about it felt lifeless. The staff barely spoke to him, their eyes downcast whenever he passed by. Even Mr. Benson, the head butler, always seemed to watch him with quiet concern, though he never voiced it. Victoria remained distant. Their conversations were short and formal, spoken over quiet dinners at the long dining table, where she sat at one end and he at the other. She never asked about his past, his life before their arrangement. It was clear Jake wasn't a husband. He was a piece in whatever game she was playing. Late one evening, unable to sleep, Jake wandered the halls of the estate. He passed doors that remained locked, rooms untouched for what seemed like years. He didn't know why, but something about the place unsettled him. As he turned a corner near the west wing, he overheard hushed voices coming from the kitchen. He recognized Mr. Benson's voice, speaking to one of the maids. "This one seems different," the maid whispered. "Does he even know?" "Not yet," Mr. Benson murmured back. "But he will." Jake's pulse quickened. What did that mean? What was it that he didn't know? He stepped closer, but the conversation abruptly ended. The kitchen door creaked, and the staff quickly dispersed as if nothing had happened. Mr. Benson's gaze met his for a moment before the butler turned away, leaving Jake with more questions than answers. The next morning, Victoria sat at the grand piano, her fingers trailing over the keys without pressing them. She glanced at him when he entered the room but didn't speak. Jake hesitated before finally breaking the silence. "Why did you really choose me?" he asked, his voice firm. Victoria looked amused, her lips curving into a smirk. "Haven't we been over this?" "I don't believe you," Jake said, stepping closer. "There are plenty of men in worse shape than me. So, why me?" She tilted her head, studying him as if deciding how much to reveal. "Because you're the right choice," she finally said. "You just don't know why yet." Her words sent a chill down his spine. He clenched his jaw, realizing he wouldn't get any real answers from her today. Determined to find out the truth, Jake began exploring the estate more thoroughly. He searched through rooms that hadn't been touched in years, dust layering old furniture and paintings that stared at him with hollow eyes. One evening, he stumbled across an old storage room tucked away in the far end of the house. It was filled with boxes covered in thick layers of dust. Something about it felt off, like it had been left untouched for a reason. He opened one of the boxes and frowned. Inside were stacks of files, detailed records, newspaper clippings, and personal documents. He flipped through them, his breath hitching as he recognized his own name on some of the pages. But it wasn't just about him. There were records of his father's illegal dealings, lists of scammed victims, including Victoria's late husband, Richard Langley. Jake's stomach churned as realization dawned on him. Victoria hadn't married him out of convenience. She had chosen him specifically because of his father's crimes. His father had left families bankrupt, had destroyed lives, and Richard Langley had been one of them. Richard's death hadn't just been from stress. It had been the result of a ruined empire, a lost fortune, a life completely shattered. His entire life, Jake had fought against his father's legacy, trying to be different, to be better. But now, he had walked into a trap that had been set long before he ever met Victoria. A slow clapping sound echoed from the doorway, making him freeze. He turned sharply to see Victoria standing there, watching him with cold amusement. "Well," she said smoothly, stepping inside. "You found it." Jake's heart pounded. "This is why you married me," he said, his voice tight. "This isn't about companionship. This is about revenge." Victoria exhaled, almost as if she were tired. "You sound so surprised," she mused. "Did you really think I was just some lonely old woman looking for company?" Jake clenched his fists. "If you want revenge, why not just go after my father?" Victoria's expression hardened. "Because your father ran. He disappeared and left behind nothing but ghosts of his crimes. But you, Jake, you're still here. And whether you like it or not, you're his legacy." Jake felt a sickening wave of realization. She didn't just want to punish his father. She wanted to punish everything connected to him, including Jake. "You think hurting me will bring Richard back?" Jake asked bitterly. Victoria's lips curled into a small, unreadable smile. "No, but it'll even the scales." Jake stepped closer, glaring at her. "You used me?" "Yes," she admitted without hesitation. "And I'm not finished yet." Something about the way she said it made his blood turn cold. "You think I'll just sit here and take it?" he asked, voice low. Victoria's smile faded, replaced by something colder. "I think you don't have a choice." Jake knew then that he had to get out. This wasn't just a marriage of convenience. This was a carefully orchestrated trap, and he had walked into it willingly. That night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He had made a mistake, a massive, life-altering mistake. He needed to find a way out before it was too late, and he knew exactly who to call. Reaching for his phone, he dialed Ethan Carter, the only person he could trust. The phone rang once, twice, before a familiar voice answered. "Jake!" Ethan sounded groggy but alert. "What's going on?" Jake exhaled, gripping the phone tightly. "I need your help." Silence for a beat, then. "Tell me everything." And so he did. By the time Jake finished explaining, Ethan was wide awake. "Jesus, Jake," he muttered. "This isn't just revenge. This is calculated. She's playing a long game." "I know," Jake said, "and I need to get out of it." Ethan hesitated. "You can't just walk away. If she's as powerful as you say, she'll make sure you can't." Jake ran a hand through his hair. "Then I need something on her. Something that gives me the upper hand." Ethan was quiet for a moment before saying, "Give me time." "I'll see what I can find." Jake swallowed, nodding even though Ethan couldn't see him. "Just be quick." Hanging up, he let the phone rest on his chest, his heart pounding against his ribs. He had made a deal with the devil. Now, he had to find a way to survive it. The morning after his call with Ethan, Jake awoke with a sense of urgency gnawing at his gut. The weight of the truth pressed down on him, heavier than before. He wasn't just trapped in a marriage of convenience. He was a pawn in a long-planned revenge scheme. Victoria Langley had spent years setting this up, ensuring he fell right into her grasp. But he wouldn't let her win. He had to find a way out. Victoria, as usual, was composed at breakfast. She sat at the head of the long dining table, sipping her tea as if nothing had changed. Jake, however, could barely touch his food. His mind was racing, thinking about what Ethan would find, what he would do next. "You're quiet this morning," Victoria noted, placing her teacup down with a soft clink. Jake forced himself to meet her gaze. "Just thinking." She smiled, but there was something sharp behind it. "That's dangerous." Jake clenched his jaw, resisting the urge to react. She was testing him, waiting for him to slip up, to reveal that he knew the full extent of her plan. But he wouldn't give her the satisfaction. As the day passed, Jake kept himself occupied by roaming the estate, though he never truly felt alone. The staff remained eerily distant, their whispers following him whenever he turned his back. He was certain they knew more than they let on. Mr. Benson, in particular, seemed to watch him more carefully than before. That night, as Jake lay in bed, his phone buzzed. He grabbed it instantly, already knowing who it was. "It's Ethan," the voice on the other end confirmed. "I found something." Jake sat up, his pulse quickening. "Tell me." Ethan hesitated, then spoke in a low, serious tone. "Victoria isn't just after you because of what your father did. She's been running illegal financial schemes herself, money laundering, fraud, and worse. Her entire empire is built on shaky ground. If this gets out, she'll lose everything." Jake's grip tightened around the phone. "So she's no better than my father." "Not at all," Ethan agreed. "And here's the real kicker. She needed to marry you to secure certain legal protections. If you dig into her business dealings, you'll find that she couldn't finalize a major financial move without a spouse. She didn't just want to punish you. She needed you to keep her empire from crumbling." Jake's stomach churned. He had assumed it was all about revenge, about making him suffer for his father's crimes. But it was more than that. Victoria had used him to shield herself from her own downfall. Ethan continued, "I have enough proof to take her down. But we have to be smart about this. If she realizes what you're doing, she won't let you walk away." Jake exhaled sharply. "Then we do it carefully. I need to get my hands on those documents, the ones that tie me to her business." "Be careful," Ethan warned. "If she finds out, she'll make sure you don't get out of there alive." Jake ended the call, his mind already racing with the next steps. He wasn't going to let Victoria win. Not this time. The next evening, when Victoria left for one of her social gatherings, Jake seized his chance. He slipped into her office, the air thick with the scent of aged books and polished wood. His hands were steady as he rummaged through her desk, searching for anything that could confirm what Ethan had found. Then he saw it, a folder with his name on it. His throat tightened as he opened it, scanning the contents. Inside were legal documents tying him to Victoria's financial empire, forged signatures, manipulated records, everything Ethan had mentioned. She had married him not just as a revenge tool, but as a financial shield. If the truth came out, he would be implicated right alongside her. "Enjoying yourself?" Jake spun around so fast that the papers nearly slipped from his hands. Victoria stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable, but her voice was ice cold. He forced himself to stay calm. "You knew I'd find this, didn't you?" She stepped closer, shutting the door behind her. "Eventually, though I thought it would take you a bit longer." Jake clenched his fists. "So this is why you needed me? To cover your tracks." Victoria sighed, as if she were exhausted. "Do you really think your father was the only one capable of ruining lives? This world doesn't reward the weak, Jake. I did what I had to do." "You trapped me," Jake hissed. "You used my father's sins against me while committing your own crimes behind closed doors." She tilted her head slightly. "And what do you plan to do now?" Jake's heart pounded, but he forced himself to keep his voice steady. I'm not my father, Victoria. I don't destroy lives to get ahead, but I won't let you destroy mine either. A slow smile crept onto her face. You're braver than I gave you credit for, but bravery won't save you. Jake met her gaze. Neither will revenge. For the first time, something flickered in Victoria's eyes, doubt, hesitation, maybe even regret. But it vanished just as quickly. You won't win this, she said softly. Jake exhaled. I already have. At that moment, the distant sound of sirens pierced the silence. Victoria's expression finally cracked. She turned toward the window as flashing blue and red lights illuminated the front gates. Jake's phone buzzed. He didn't need to check it to know it was Ethan. You called them, Victoria whispered, her voice barely audible. Jake didn't respond. He didn't need to. A loud knock echoed through the estate. Victoria Langley. A voice called from outside. This is the police. We have a warrant for your arrest. Open the door immediately. Victoria let out a quiet, humorless laugh. She turned back to Jake, her face unreadable once more. You think this is over? Jake met her gaze. No, but it's over for you. Mr. Benson appeared in the doorway, his face grim. They're here, ma'am. Victoria closed her eyes for a moment. When she reopened them, she was composed again, regal even in the face of her downfall. Without another word, she turned and walked past Jake toward the front door. The moment it opened, officers flooded inside. They read her charges, fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, as they placed her in handcuffs. Before she was led away, she turned back to Jake one last time. Be careful, Jake, she murmured. Revenge isn't as easily buried as you think. Then she was gone. Jake stood frozen in place, his pulse hammering in his ears. The weight of everything settled on his shoulders. What he had done, what she had done, what they both had lost. He had ended Victoria's reign, but deep down he knew this wasn't truly over. The ghosts of the past never stayed buried for long. Jake stood in the Grand Langley estate, now eerily silent. The police had taken Victoria away, the flashing lights fading into the night. For the first time since stepping into this mansion, he was truly alone. The weight of everything, his rushed marriage, the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal, settled on his chest. The house, once a prison, now felt hollow, stripped of its master. He walked through the halls, his footsteps echoing off the marble floors. The staff had retreated into the shadows, unsure of their future. Mr. Benson, the butler who had watched him so closely, finally approached. What happens now, sir? Benson asked, his voice calm, as though this were merely another change in the household. Jake exhaled. I don't know. And that was the truth. He had spent so much time trying to get out of Victoria's trap, but now that she was gone, he had no idea what came next. A few days later, Victoria's trial began. The courtroom was packed with reporters, all eager to see the once powerful woman fall. Jake sat in the back, watching as she remained as composed as ever, her expression unreadable. Despite the weight of the evidence against her, she did not plead for mercy. When the judge handed down her sentence, 15 years in federal prison for fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering, she merely nodded. As she was led out of the courtroom, her gaze briefly met Jake's. There was no hatred, no rage, just something quiet, something that almost looked like acceptance. And then she was gone. Jake had expected to feel relief. Instead, there was only a strange hollowness. She had built her life on revenge, and now that it had consumed her, all that remained was emptiness. A week later, Jake was summoned back to Langley Estate for a meeting with Victoria's lawyer. When he arrived, he found a single envelope on the lawyer's desk, addressed to him in Victoria's elegant handwriting. He hesitated before opening it. Jake, by now, you have everything you wanted. Your freedom, your name cleared, your debts erased. But don't fool yourself into thinking you won. You did what you had to do, just as I did what I had to do. We are not so different, you and I. I spent years consumed by revenge, only to realize too late that it does not bring peace. It only leaves you with nothing. You made me see that. So I am leaving you with one final lesson. Do not let the past define your future. You can still walk away from the life your father left you. You can choose to be something more. The estate is yours now. Do with it as you will. Victoria. Jake read the letter twice, then set it down, staring at the words as if they might change. She had given him everything. The very estate she had used as her fortress of revenge was now in his hands. He could have sold it and disappeared, could have walked away and never looked back. But instead, he made a different choice. He sold the estate, but not for himself. The money went to clearing his debts, paying for his Aunt Linda's treatment, and helping the people his father had wronged. But it wasn't enough to undo the past. Nothing could ever undo the past. A year later, he stood in a small auditorium, speaking before a crowd. The Richard Langley Fund for Financial Justice had just been established, offering support to victims of fraud and financial crime. The name felt right. It was a way to honor the man his father had ruined, a way to break the cycle. After the event, he walked outside, feeling the cool evening air against his skin. In his pocket, Victoria's letter remained, slightly crumpled from being read too many times. She had been right about one thing. Revenge was a prison. But unlike her, he had chosen to walk away from it.